you are feeding commercial food, it's right there on the bag. It tells you how much you're to feed. And so when you start out home cooking, it's not really cooking. In some ways it's cooking, in some it's not. But when you start out creating these meals, you never know how much to feed. And there seems to be a wide range, and it depends on a lot of factors. So could you help our viewers kind of understand how you figure that out?
Yeah, it does depend on a lot of factors, and the bottom line is that nobody knows how much food your dog needs, and it requires a bit of experimentation, and people who are really dependent on those labels, those dog food labels, to tell them how much to feed their dogs are going to feel like they're stepping off a cliff
Mhm.
to not be told how much they're supposed to feed. So what we've done is we've come up with a range, and if you're feeding a high meat rotation, which means, you're feeding one plant day a week or two, something like that, and the rest are meat days, you might want to start on the low end because meat is so dense in fuel, and it's less dilute than the plant foods that we feed. So, but if you're starting on a high plant food rotation, you're going to be wanting to feed somewhere, and this is by weight
Mhm.
only, 3 to 10% of the dog's body weight. So what we have calculations that we use on our group so that people can figure this out easily, but you just take the dog's weight times 16 ounces in the case of our
Yeah.
system here, and divide or multiply by 0.03 if you want 3%, or 0.07 if you want 7%, and to pick somewhere between the 3 to 10% to start with is totally fine. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to start with 3% of body weight for meat days and 6% body weight, that's probably a good starting point for just
Mhm.
about every dog.
Yeah. And I think it's okay. You can fast your dog for several days, and they're going to be fine. It's like people really start to freak out that, oh, if I don't give my dog this exact amount of food, that something's going to go haywire. But after you've gotten used to feeding your dog this way, it's no problem at all making adjustments as you go along. And I think most people will
Right.
discover that you can start out within that big range, and then you can just adjust over time, whether it means, throwing in an extra meat day, or adding a few more plants to your plant meals, or reducing it. If I notice that Blue's getting a little chunky, I just I'll fast him an extra day.
Exactly. And you know what that does for people? It gives you all the power.
Hmm.
That is an educational process because it tells you exactly what your dog needs, and nobody else knows. Nobody else can tell you what your dog needs. But at the end of that process, when he has symptoms, oh, you've had too many meat days or too much, food overall. That's what I do with my dog. I mean, I see a little itching and I go, well, we'll skip breakfast tomorrow,
Yeah.
and the itching goes away. You don't wait until it gets really bad. I mean, it just becomes so obvious when you think these things all the way through why we've been taught this. Because if you let things build up and pile up and get really bad, it doesn't serve anybody except that industry, that
Right.
fitness industry.
Hmm. Let's talk about specific foods, because everybody loves feeding their dogs foods that they also love. I really
Hmm.
enjoy feeding my dogs watermelon because I love watermelon, and sometimes we'll just take like a half of a huge watermelon out in the yard because it's super messy, and I'll eat it and they'll eat it. And what kind of plant foods can you feed these dogs on plant days?
Dogs like all kinds of sweet fruits. Usually citrus is rejected by dogs. Dogs
Hmm.
don't typically eat grapefruits or lemons, or, some will eat oranges. Oranges are sweet. Um, but berries sometimes come through intact, so they have trouble sometimes with like blueberries from the grocery store. The some of the fruits that we feed from the grocery store have been hybridized so that they're very shelf stable. And that sometimes means that the skin, the membrane, whatever, is thicker than it would be out in the wild. So you might see a dog eating lots of blueberries out in the wild and digesting them just fine. But you might see whole blueberries coming out of your dog. So in that case, you know, whenever you see something whole coming out, you want to process it a little more, maybe puree it, mash it, or stop feeding that food temporarily in the meantime if you're already doing that. So sometimes that's kind of a disguise. You won't be able to tell that the dog's not digesting it. If you're pureeing it, it might come out whole. It might come out the same way it went in, but it's going to look the same, you know, and the dog won't have digested it. So, but pureeing in theory does help.
Yeah.
So any kind of fruit. Right now I'm feeding my dog lots of apricots because I have lots of tree ripened apricots right now, and she loves them. They're very dense, they're very sweet. Dogs love figs. In the winter it's a little harder, but dogs love pears, they love apples, grapes, believe it or not. Lots of our members feed grapes, and that's a whole topic on its own. But cooked yams, like we covered in the last video, cooked yams, cooked quinoa. And that's, you know, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
A lot of people do feed their dogs cooked vegetables. I'm not really big on vegetables. They have some mineral matter that's harmed in the cooking process.
Yeah.
And they don't have much sugar. So if the minerals are harmed and they don't have much sugar, and they've got a lot of cellulose. The cellulose is broken down a bit by the cooking process. But what all that adds up to is there's not much left for the dog. So vegetables for us and for dogs are overrated. I tend to feed sweet foods to dogs. They love melons too. I forgot to mention melons. Melons should probably be fed alone because they ferment very quickly. They either digest or ferment very quickly. So if they're fed with other foods, they can cause a bit of, you know, flatulence or whatever. So I don't feed melons with other food.
On the fruits, I guess a good rule of thumb, and I've heard you say this before, is if they don't want to eat it, then it's probably not something, you know, that you should feed. Or unless you're dealing with a dog, I guess, that doesn't want to eat any fruit whatsoever, in which case, you know, it would be a good idea to fast the dog to see if then they would then accept. And if not, then keep trying over time, because a lot of dogs actually come around and end up loving their plant meals.
Yeah.